The thing is though, back during the massive boom that the TCG market saw in the 90s and early 2000s, everything had a TCG. And I do mean everything. It got pretty ridiculous at times, to be honest, and I do plan to cover a few of the many, many cash grab licensed TCGs in future episodes. The time has arrived! Teen Titans was an animated television series based on the DC comic book, which aired on Cartoon Network from 2003 through 2006. But you probably already knew that. The show was well received at the time, and it's only become more well regarded since, in the face of its far more, let's say, divisive successor. In 2005, during its 4th season, Bandai, alongside the action figures they put out for the show, released the Teen Titans Collectible card game. Its first set, Teen Titans Go, contained 120 different cards, and had a single 2-player starter set to introduce it to new players. A single expansion, Enter Titans East, released later that same year, adding 120 new cards, including a new type of card called Gadgets. Unfortunately, I couldn't find Enter Titans East, and I mean that literally. This isn't a case like Wyvern where the expansions are out there just crazy expensive. No, I searched high and low and couldn't find anyone, anywhere, who had even a single booster box for sale. In fact, the only evidence I can find that this expansion even existed to begin with is this one article about its announcement, and a handful of online stores that claim to have had it in stock at one point, but are all sold out now. Needless to say, the game didn't last very long. Those 2 sets are all it ever got, and from what I can gather, Bandai had removed all mention of it from their website as early as 2007. I don't know if it's because the show was cancelled after Season 5, or if the card game just sold that poorly, but this was very short-lived. It may be connected to the licensing deal that Cartoon Network struck with Mattel, which is also cited as a possible reason for the show's cancellation, as well as why the toys were pulled from store shelves around that time, but there's nothing definitive. And that's everything I know about this game. It was actually pretty difficult to find any detailed information about it, and it's not even mentioned anywhere on the show's Wikipedia page. I was able to find a single page of rules for tournaments, but I don't even know if any tournaments were ever actually held. Before we begin, I have to admit that I never actually watched the show all that much. It was one of those shows that I would watch when I happened to catch it airing, but I didn't see nearly enough of it to even begin to follow the ongoing storyline, or have any strong feelings one way or the other when it was cancelled. One of these days I probably will go back and watch it all the way through, but bear in mind that I'm not coming at this card game from the perspective of a fan. Whether I end up liking it or not will come down entirely to the quality of the game itself, not from the source material. Cool? Cool. Well, for starters, the cards have a pretty nice quality to them. The cardstock is solid, about the same thickness as a Magic card. The card back is a bit busy with this massive logo plus 5 characters, but that's not unusual for a licensed TCG, and there is some nice use of color here, so it's not terrible. I do really like the frame though. It's slightly askew with these sketchy lines and thick borders, names and flavor text printed at varying sizes and angles, part of the art sometimes even popping out of the border, and it all very much fits the superhero comic book aesthetic. The different types of cards also have very bright shades for their backgrounds too, making it a simple matter to tell a character card from a storyline card or a skill card. Excuse me, skills card, with a Z. Hey, come on man, we gotta have an X or a Z in there somewhere, because it's cool and it's the 90s, man. Was that? It's 2005? Oh, yeah, this was dated even at the time, but now, 15 years later, it's even more cringe-inducing. Anyway, the art is mostly just stills from the show, which is really common in these sorts of licensed TCGs, and which I really don't like. It's always incredibly obvious when they do it, and it makes the whole game look cheap. This sort of thing gives the impression that they didn't want to put in the effort of making original artwork, so they just lazily slapped on pictures from the show and called it a day before shoving the cards on the market to make a quick buck. Which, let's be real, is probably exactly how it went. At least here, they generally picked better stills than most games like this tend to. It's still obvious, but none of them are offensively bad or anything, though that says more about the quality of the show's visual design than it does about the cards. Well, save for a few that are either blurry or heavily pixelated. Come on guys, this can't be that hard to avoid. At least the holofoil is nice. It's just applied to the artwork and often only the background, but that's really all you need to make the image pop. If nothing else, they're the best holofoil cards I've covered so far on this show. As licensed TCGs go, I'd say the aesthetic of this one is fairly above average. Original artwork would have been nice, but that's so rare among these that I can't judge it too harshly. On a weird side note, the 2-player starter set includes Blackfire in the deck representing the side of the Teen Titans. I haven't seen much of the show, but even I know she doesn't belong there. This isn't a big deal, I just thought it was worth mentioning. And now for the fun part, how the game plays. A Teen Titans deck has exactly 53 cards. 50 will be a mix of character, skills, and storyline cards, and the last 3 are field cards. Character cards are exactly what they sound like. Heroes and villains from the show sent out to do battle with one another at your command. Each character has a grade, a team, a power rating, a series of attributes, and some of them also have a special ability. Grade is sort of like the character's level. A higher grade is a stronger card, and some characters come in multiple variations with different grades. What's cool about this is, while you're limited to only 3 copies of a particular card in your deck, different grades count as different cards. Which means you could theoretically make a deck entirely focused on one character if you want to, like if you're the world's #1 fan of Jinx or something. You probably shouldn't do that, but you can. A character's team determines which other characters they can fight alongside, but I'll get into that later, and it seems to have a minimal effect on play anyway. Power is exactly what it sounds like, the character's strength. Attributes determine which skills cards you can use on that character, and special abilities have all kinds of different effects, but only about half of the character cards actually have these, so their effect on play isn't quite as great as they maybe should have been. I do like how they all have unique names, though. Skills cards are used during battle to boost the power of your characters. They have a power meter, which tells you the possible costs and power boosts provided by the card, a list of required attributes for use, and sometimes an additional special effect that activates under certain conditions, typically being played on a specific character. Storyline cards can be played in or out of battle for various effects. They have a cost, an effect, and a specific phase during which they can be used. And field cards are the locations in which your characters will do battle. These cards are very simple. They have a limit score and a field effect, which affect the way battles will play out. When building your deck, you are allowed duplicates of the same field card, but you do need to make sure the sum of the limit scores of your 3 cards is exactly 10. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this game is that, like in Ophidian, there are no turns in the traditional sense. Both players can play the same cards every turn, with it simply alternating which player is on offense and which is on defense. Some effects can only be used when you're on one or the other, but the main difference between the two is simply that the offensive player gets priority. To start a game, you separate your 3 field cards from the rest of your deck and set them face down alongside your opponents. Then you determine who will go on offense first and begin play. First comes the draw phase. Both players draw from their decks until they have 5 cards in their hand. Once both players have 5 cards, they may each set down as many cards in their hand as they'd like into the action zone. This name is rather non-indicative of its purpose since it exists to provide resources. Whenever you play a skills or storyline card, you need to discard cards from the action zone in order to pay the cost. Then comes the staging phase. Starting with the offensive player, both players may play a single character card from their hand face down into their respective staging areas. You don't have to play a character card every turn, but since you only get 1 per turn, and they tend to die rather quickly, there's rarely any reason not to. Additionally, you're only allowed to have a single copy of any given character in play at a time, including alternate grades, unless they have the infinite tag. This is why building a deck entirely out of a single character is a bad idea. After that is the move phase. Starting with the offensive player, both players can now move their characters around as they like. Characters in the staging area can advance onto a field card, and characters on field cards can retreat into the staging area. Characters aren't required to move, but they can only move once in a turn, so you can't move directly from one field to another. The offensive player can only move their characters to attack the opponent's field cards, while the defensive player can only move to defend their own fields. If either player has any storyline cards that can be used during the move phase, they may do so, starting with the offensive player. When you play a storyline card, you discard from your action zone to pay its cost. So for example, this Fix-It card requires discarding 2 cards, and then you use its effect. After both players are finished moving their characters, they enter the battle phase, and every character the offensive player has on their opponent's field cards will attack. All relevant face-down cards, whether they be characters or fields, are revealed, and the battles begin. If there are multiple battles, the offensive player gets to decide the order in which they take place, but all battles play out in the same way. First, you need to check the team and grade of your characters. It is possible for a player to move multiple characters onto the same field, but they may only do so if those characters have the same team, though characters without a team can fight with anyone. So one of the Teen Titans can't fight alongside a member of Slade's army, for example. Additionally, each side of the battle can only contain characters whose total grade is equal to or less than the limit of the field. So, for example, if a field's limit is 4, you can have a single grade 4 character, or a grade 3 character, or a grade 2, or one grade 3 and a grade 1, or 2 grade 2s, but their total grades can't exceed that 4. If for some reason your character's teams don't match, or their grade exceeds the field's limit, then one of two things happen. If the violation is done by the offensive player, the battle simply doesn't occur and all the characters stay where they are. If, on the other hand, it's the defensive player who screws up, then their characters are ejected from the field back into the staging area, and the battle takes place without them. Assuming, however, that everything is fine and dandy, the characters will fight. Look at all of the special abilities of the characters involved, the field effect of the field, to see how they'll affect the battle, and then compare the power of each side. Needless to say, the higher number wins. It is possible to play additional cards to alter the outcome of the battle, though. Starting with the offensive player, both players can play any storyline or skills cards from their hand to raise or lower the power of either side. Storyline cards only have a single cost and effect, but skills cards are slightly more involved. First off, while some skills cards have no requirements, most do, and you can only play that skills card if at least one of your characters has the attribute listed as the requirement. So while Raven, for example, can make use of the Power of Flight card, Robin can't. Additionally, each skills card has this power meter, and wow, that's a lot of numbers. But it's ultimately not that complicated. The numbers on the right indicate possible power boosts that can be provided by the card, and the numbers on the left are the costs that must be paid for each respective boost. So if I wanted to use this energy cannon to grant an extra 200 power, I would need to discard one card from the action zone. Alternatively, I could discard 2 cards to raise that boost to 300, or just accept a simple increase of 100 without discarding anything. Of course, different skills cards have different power meters, so you need to do some minimal planning around what's in your hand when sending cards to the action zone at the start of the turn. I really like this idea. Giving skills cards variable degrees of power with different costs gives them all a greater degree of flexibility than you typically see with cards like this. It opens up more potential for interesting strategies. Unfortunately, they don't do nearly as much with this as they really should have. How cool would it have been if skills cards could, say, get extra effects if you pay at least a certain amount for them? Anyway, after both players have used whichever storyline and skills cards they want, you add up the total power of each side to determine the winner. On a tie, nothing happens. Characters stay where they are, and you move on to the next battle, if any. But most of the time, one side will defeat the other. The winning player takes the defeated character or characters and sets them aside like captured pieces in chess. They now have a number of victory points equal to the total grades of those characters. Additionally, if the offensive player won the battle, then the defensive player takes the top card of their deck and places it underneath the field card to represent field damage, basically collateral damage to the area caused by the fight. If a field ends up taking total field damage equal to its limit, it's destroyed. The winning player takes the field card the same way they would a defeated character and earns victory points equal to its limit. All of the cards used for field damage are sent to the discard pile. Also, if the offensive player has a character on one of the defensive player's field cards, but that field is undefended, then the battle simply deals 1 field damage to the field. The first player to accumulate 15 victory points, or to destroy all 3 of their opponent's field cards, wins the game. After the battle phase, the round ends, and now it's the other player's turn to go on the offensive. And that's about all there is to it. Teen Titans is not a particularly complicated game. In fact, it's honestly a little too simple. Everything is so direct and straightforward, there's no potential for layered card interactions or alternate win states. You'll occasionally find a card that gets a bonus when used with a specific character, sure, but that's about the extent of it. I'm also not wild about the team mechanic. It fits with the lore. The Titans would never fight alongside Slade in the show, granted, but it greatly limits the ways you can make your character cards interact. And when designing a card game, good gameplay should always trump flavor. Not that this ends up really affecting much because of the limit mechanic.
I really like this idea in theory, limiting the total power level of the characters you can fight in a given location. It acts as a decent balancing factor, forcing players to include a mix of high and low-grade characters to avoid the risk of encountering a field that all of your characters are too strong to capture.
But in practice, it's far too restrictive.
The highest limit I have seen on any card is 4, and you need a total limit value of exactly 10, which means you're required to use at least 1, 2, or 3 limit card, and the unfortunate result of this is that it's actually somewhat difficult to squeeze more than a single worthwhile character onto any given field. Which of course renders the team rule pointless, since you'll so rarely be able to have characters fight together at all. Because of this, it's not even possible to get all 5 of the Teen Titans fighting together. You know, the main thing that they did in the show?
This game also has a huge problem with unstable equilibrium. If you've watched either my Wyvern or my MSF High video, you should understand this concept already, so I won't recap it again. Just watch either one of those if you want to know more.
Because you can only play 1 character card per turn, and they're only removed from the board when they lose a battle, it can be very easy to fall behind when you lose your first couple battles in a row, leaving your board empty and your opponent's filled with an ever-increasing army. Sure, there's a limit of 6 characters at most in the staging area at any one time, but when your opponent has enough manpower to assault all 3 of your field cards at once, while you can only defend a single one, it becomes immediately obvious that you have no means of catching up.
In a better TCG, there would be cards that can act like balancing mechanics to this kind of one-sided board state, typically by wiping it clean. Your Wrath of Gods and your Dark Holes, that sort of thing. Things that can make it just a little bit easier to catch up when you're that far behind. But as far as I can tell, Teen Titans doesn't have anything of the sort.
Field damage only compounds this problem, since you're forced to remove cards from your deck with every hit, leaving you with even less with which you can fight back.
The net result of this is that the game is more or less decided in the first few turns, which means a bad opening hand will sink your chances for victory before you even begin. And since the rules don't allow for a mulligan, luck ends up as the most important factor, not skill.
There's also the issue of drawing back up to 5 cards at the beginning of every round.
In case it's not clear already after my MSF High video, I am not a fan of games using this type of refill mechanic. It minimizes the effective card advantage on play, resulting in more shallow strategy, and it discourages the conservation of resources, since there's no long-term penalty for burning through everything you have every single turn.
It's even more notable here, since when you inevitably run out of cards to draw, you just shuffle your discard pile into a new deck, restoring most of your cards back to where they started.
So you don't even have the risk of decking out hanging over your head. Go nuts every turn. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Resources are infinite and we'll all live forever! And I guess it could be worse. At least the rulebook actually tells you what to do when you deck out. Come to think of it, this game has a lot of similarities to MSF High. Starting the game with a few cards already on the board and losing if they're all destroyed, discarding cards as resources, completely refilling your hand at the start of a new turn. Well, Teen Titans isn't that bad, but that isn't saying much. Though it also has some weird omissions in the rulebook.
The first thing that jumps out at me is this question. What happens to unused action cards left over at the end of a round? I assume they just stay there and can be saved for a future turn, but some clarification would be nice.
The bigger problem is that there's nothing about what happens to your characters after they destroy a field.
So you've just won a battle and dealt the last point of field damage to one of your opponent's field cards, which means that card is removed from the game. So what happens to your character? They were in that field, but now that field isn't there anymore. Do they just stay suspended there in empty space? Do you need to wait for the following turn to return them to the staging area, using up their movement for that turn? Or do they automatically pull back as soon as the field is destroyed? I read the entire rulebook multiple times, and nowhere does it answer this question.
There may have been errata explaining these things at some point, but like I said earlier, Bandai's website hasn't had anything about this game in years, and they never printed a revised rulebook. So if there were any errata, they're lost forever now. Honestly, nothing sums up this game more than the phrase wasted potential, and nowhere is that felt more deeply than with storyline cards.
Their effects are all so simple and have such minimal impact on the long-term play of the game.
You know what might have been a lot better? If the storyline cards were like actual storylines.
If they were something you played down that would stick around for a while, maybe forcing you to pay an upkeep cost to keep them in play and affected the entire board while there. Anything that isn't just yet more one-off effects like everything else. Field cards almost do that with their field effects, but most of them barely do anything at all. Oh, plus 200 power to one specific character and no one else. How useful. Once again, so much wasted potential.
There's also no reason for this game to even use the Teen Titans license to begin with. Well, there is, but the license has all of zero effect on the actual design of the mechanics. Think about it, superheroes are some of the most amazing material to work with. It's pretty much the only genre where you can bring together characters and world-building elements with radically different origins and tones, and still have it feel like a cohesive whole. You can go as fantastical as you want. Have you seen some of the crazy stuff that goes on in superhero comics? There are no limits to the potential creativity. And yet Teen Titans has no flavor to its gameplay.
It's like when someone who doesn't play trading card games looks at one and says, "Oh, isn't that just fancy war? All you're doing is trying to get higher numbers than the other guy, just with extra steps."
And we laugh, because it isn't just fancy war, not really. There are layers of strategy and ways to play that don't even involve the strict numbers as much. A game of Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Feels like a duel between wizards. A game of Pokemon feels like a Pokemon battle.
But when you play Teen Titans, it never really feels like a superhero battle. All you do is try to make a higher number than the other guy. The Teen Titans collectible card game really is just fancy war.
I really wanted to like this one. Yeah, most licensed TCGs are crap, but there are good ones out there, and I was hoping this would be one of them. Alas. If you want a comic book flavored card game, play Sentinels of the Multiverse instead. It may not have the collection appeal of a TCG, but it does a far better job recreating the feel of superhero battles. There's even a digital version on Steam if you prefer that sort of thing. Before I go, I want to give a special thank you to Frasier Erlingsdottir, who was partially responsible for this episode after she made me aware of this game's existence and helped a bit with the research. Also, here's your obligatory like, subscribe, share this video, support my Patreon spiel, YouTube. Mr. Algorithm, will you be kind to me now, please? No? Okay. Until the next time you pay me a visit, this is Craig bidding you farewell from the Dungeon of the Discarded. Titans, go and play something else. Ugh, no, that's terrible. Why did I think this was funny? Cut it, just cut the whole bit.